Welcome to the second episode of I Get Views for You, where I'm joined on the couch by Angela Haggerty from Uncommon Space, where we're going to be taking a look at some of the opinion pieces written this week and get a kind of general feel for what people are interested in. And obviously one of the big things happening at the moment is it's the anniversary of the referendum in Scotland, so that's been kind of playing in people's mind. What's really been written about it?
Well, we thought we might try and do a series because everybody's covering Indie Ref anniversary. You know that there's like overkill probably. There's so much out there. So we thought we'd just ask people, how did Indie Ref change your life? What did it mean to you? And just try and get some personal accounts up there from people that activists, that kind of those kinds of people. So we got a good few pieces, and one was from David Carr. He's one of our regular columnists. He writes for us every week, and he was looking at the musical soundtrack to the referendum and how important music was in it, which was is a really lovely piece. He says each song is part of a heritage, a tradition that says this is who we are, from the past to the present to the future, gathering more songs as we go. And it really is. It's such a nice piece. All of these pieces made me feel a bit emotional actually, and I thought I was fine coming up to the anniversary. I thought, nah, I'm okay, I'll not get nostalgic. But then reading through them and just remembering what the energy was like this time last year, it's just, you wonder whether we'll ever get something quite like that again, even if there is another Indie Ref. Wouldn't be the same,
Yeah, definitely on Facebook as well, just seeing all the posts, people sharing photos from like when you're on, and sort of remembering back what it was like to be actually campaigning, and that is quite powerful. But there was one song specifically from the referendum by Makanta, called Be a Nation. I thought it was just constantly overlooked, but it was actually one of the best ones that was written. I was really upset to see it didn't quite get the recognition that it deserved.
Yeah, we had David pointed out Stanley Odd's Son I Voted Yes, which I hadn't heard before actually, so I've listened to that. It was quite good. And Wild Mountain Time, he says, is a personal favourite of his as well, so I think he said he still can't quite listen to them. He gets a bit too teary. And with Scott McDonald, he is an activist, and he just says the referendum campaign changed me and it changed Scotland, and no one I know wants to go back in the box. And he talks about the meetings that he went to and how just there were so many people turning out to these things and taking the organisers by such surprise that they really, really did believe that they might just do it, they might win it. And that's a really common thing, that we're not going back in the box. It was quite a common phrase.
And especially because after the referendum, it did seem like so much of the commentary coming out from the pro-union politicians was seemingly geared towards, okay, that's it done. It was so divisive, we can't talk about it anymore. Oh, well, it's once in a generation, so we can't talk about it anymore. It was very much about trying to seemingly close the debate down, and if anything, I think it just got people more riled up to keep talking about it and to keep moving forward with it. Because I think there was generally a feeling that maybe again it's just being within certain social media bubbles, but it wasn't a no, it was a not yet. So there was a feeling of try and stop the conversation, or try and move past the conversation as quickly as possible, so that things would stop being framed in the context of the referendum. So when the vow started to kind of crumble out, it would be, don't look at it in the context of the referendum. Or when pensions went downhill after being told, vote no to save your pensions, it wouldn't be looked at in the context of the referendum.
But yet here we are a year later, and it's still the thing that everybody's talking about all the time. Where Gary Elliott, another one of our regular columnists, he did a really good piece about becoming a canvasser, and it's something that he never thought he would do, knocking on doors. It's quite daunting doing something like that. I don't think I'd want to do that. So he was just talking about some of the conversations that he'd had. It's quite funny actually, because you can just picture it, you can sort of see it. And he talks about this one time where they went into a cul-de-sac. There was a few different canvassers, and when they went in, all of the doors were closed. And he says 10 minutes earlier this had been a quiet cul-de-sac with doors closed. Now the air was abuzz with chat, discussion, questions, answers, debate, banter, laughs, some opinion, dismissal, some gentle disagreement, stats, policy, you name it. And that was one of those moments where he just kind of turned round and thought, wow, this is really something. It was quite nice. And then this morning actually we had a piece from Annie Smith. It's the first time she's written for us, and it was about how Indie Ref gave her voice back. She had wanted at one time to be a writer, to be a journalist actually, and she went in another direction. And she said it was through social media. She started to write Facebook posts and then realised they were becoming more like blogs, and then they were starting to get read more and more, and there was one sort of definitive piece that got about 17,000 views. And she was just bowled over by that, and she says social media gave normal people a voice, no editor was deciding on angles or whose voice was most deserving. And I think that's quite an important point about how people felt like they took the media for themselves in some way. They used social media to do that.
Absolutely. And well, this wouldn't exist
exactly.
without that very thing, since that's kind of where I started to create political content, was through the referendum as well, and feeling like the discussion was far too controlled, whether that was by the parties or whether that was by papers that had their own agenda.
And that takes us on to the next piece. Was from Pat Kane, the famous Pat Kane, musician and activist, very well known throughout the referendum, and he talks a bit about the media in his piece. He talks just about how it impacted him, but he does talk specifically about the media problem. And he says the way that both UK public and private broadcasters and press acted in concertation, whether explicitly or just habitually, to deride, misinform, scaremonger the case for Indy, didn't just enrage me. It made me worried for some basic freedoms in the face of what Chomsky classically called the manufacture of consent. And then he goes on to talk about how one of the great things to come out of the referendum has been the rise of like digital media platforms that have offered an alternative. And he concludes in his piece by saying that he thinks that the second independence referendum is inevitable, that it will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, looking at recent polling and just general chatter, it does seem like there will be another one at some point, but preferably when we're actually more prepared.
Yeah. So that was all the indie ref pieces, and then we had a good mix of other stuff on the site this week. Predictably, Jeremy Corbyn, is a point of discussion, and the couple of pieces that we had on that this week was sort of focused on the media response to him, with a piece from Richard McGinley. He's talking about Corbyn's going to face an uphill battle in terms of the media, because he just doesn't think that he's going to get any sort of positive or friendly coverage. And we also had Steve Topple, who wrote for us. He said, Corbyn has arrived, so send in the media clowns, which I was taking a little bit personally until I read it, got past the headline. So he has a bit of a he takes everybody through what some of the commentators have been saying, but then he goes on to say, sadly, editorial rooms are not cut off from what the public think. They decide what we think, as has always been the case. Yes, Corbyn's campaign was a remarkable display of grassroots activism, social media mobilisation, and telling an establishment organisation to get stuffed. But his point is that the mainstream media is still so much more powerful than I think sometimes we want to believe it is. It's an interesting thing to say, though. The media decides what we think. Do you think that's true? Do you think the media decides what people think?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, if you look back at the Sun newspaper, the most widely read newspaper in the UK, since I think the 50s, every general election, whichever party the Sun has decided to back has ultimately won in Westminster. And yeah, you could argue that maybe they're just jumping on the bandwagon of whichever party they think is going to win.
Just guessing.
But equally, I mean, there could be a degree of they don't need to publish stories that show the opponents in a favourable light. They can just continuously smear one side and promote the other, and it's very possible that with that kind of system in place,
though, would the SNP have won a landslide victory in Scotland at the general election if the media decided what we thought?
Well, you could argue that the media did decide what we thought by consistently scaremongering to the point where we turned away from them and did our own thing. In the case of unintended consequences, I think a lot of people turned away from the mainstream media, and certainly I would argue that a lot of SNP supporters were more likely to be hostile towards mainstream press off the back of the referendum, where it was seemingly a continuous onslaught of negative press from more established papers, particularly ones that had a more right-wing slant already.
I think it is an interesting thing, because obviously the media is powerful, but then a part of me thinks, well, are we not being a little bit sort of selling people short if we think they're not capable of putting information together for themselves and coming to a different conclusion, that it has to be decided for them?
But I mean, you could argue as well that it's about being informed, and if a paper isn't going to inform you correctly, you will arrive at your own conclusion, just not necessarily the correct one. That's why having a kind of, or at least reading lots of different sources is so important, and why the kind of rise of, I'd argue, digital media is really important, because it does provide another way of looking at things, and it does provide a little bit more in terms of a balanced debate.
James McEnany has another one of our regular columnists. He was writing about Jeremy Corbyn this week as well, and of course this was Anthem Gate, the national anthem. which of course took the front pages by storm just when you thought things couldn't get any more hysterical. But he says that this was Jeremy Corbyn's catch-22, because he said if you imagined that he had sung the national anthem, then he says here the headlines would have read, not all he jazz he is, Corbyn hypocrisy, an insult to veterans, and principle abandoned as Jeremy falls in line. So he says the truth is that faced with an openly hostile, hypocritical and disreputable press, there is no way for Corbyn to avoid criticism. Catch-22 in all its bewildering glory.
I think he did the right thing, to be fair. Better to be to have an opportunity to come and explain yourself than kind of be branded a hypocrite. I think the Poke summed it up really nicely, which was agnostic Republican, or public outrage as agnostic Republican doesn't sing about a god supporting a monarchy. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. It's either he turns his back on his principles, or and be branded a hypocrite, or he gets slammed either way. And this is exactly it about a press that's actively hostile towards him. No matter what happens, there'll always be a slant of pulling the story towards being against him in some way, and he's going to have to face that for the next however many years, assuming he even gets to the next general election.
It was interesting chatting in the office about it. You know, I think we all had a few different opinions on whether it was the right thing to do strategically from a press point of view, because he then became the story of the day when tax credits were being cut severely, and that should have been the story of the day, but it wasn't. It was Corbyn not singing the national anthem. So arguably, if he was a little bit smarter about things, not to say that he wasn't being smart, but if he maybe not done that, would he have been able to get more attention on the things that other people think are actually more important? So some people think that his PR is just really bad. Some people think it's genius. So I'm not quite sure. It's interesting to watch, see how it unfolds.
Yeah, we'll have to really see what happens next.
Yeah. And then we have Ian Dunn. This one's completely out there. A rugby bagpipe ban is a bloody disgrace, is the headline. And this is, I think it's the Rugby World Cup, and I hope I've got that right. I'm not a rugby fan, so I'm not quite sure which competition this one is. I think it's the World Cup. Apparently they've banned bagpipes. You can't take bagpipes into the stadiums.
Right, okay.
So he's not very happy about this. He says you should not be able to bar other cultures just because you don't like the sound of them. Sharing all the challenging and difficult edges of life leaves it a bland, dull monochrome. So, but I mean, the interesting thing about this actually is that earlier this year, as Ian says in the piece, Boris Johnson changed some of the rules around noise level or pollution or something in London, which basically means that bagpipe buskers can't do it anymore.
That's right, yeah, I do remember hearing that. But bring it back. So is he arguing that bagpipes are in fact a difficult edge of life? At the moment, says it. Well, you know, without these difficult edges of life, it'd be very dull. Sort of revealing his position in bagpipes, maybe. Personally, I'm all for them. I think they're fantastic. But it does seem strange to, I guess, specifically single out one country's national instrument and ban it. I presumably because of how loud they are.
Yeah, because it maybe irritates some people. I don't know. It's quite an interesting one. But I think that it was because this had happened earlier this year and now it's banned at the rugby. It was feeling a bit like, is this sort of a little bit deliberate? Are you trying to kind of edge a bit of the culture out there? So that was an interesting one. And then finally this week, one from Kath Sullivan. Now this one got people talking. This one really set the debate alight on social media. And the headline to this is, why would we legalise violence against women? And this is connected to a motion I think that Gina Hart is putting through, and I think she backs the legalisation of sex work. And this is a real point of debate among feminists, women's groups, and all over. Some people believe that that prostitution, sex work, is a form of violence against women, and there is no other context in which you can look at it. Other people believe that it's a woman's choice and that she should be able to make that choice without fear of criminalisation. She should be able to have the protections that other workers would have and all those kinds of things, and also because it would make them safer. So Kath Sullivan comes down on the side that sex work is violence against women and that under no circumstances should it be legalised and legitimised. She says the problem is that if you decriminalise prostitution, you legitimise violence against women, Women do not choose prostitution as a progressive career choice, and I do not believe those who would argue that they do so. Even if you could believe the few women who say it's okay for them, it is quite clearly not okay for all the others. That's who we have to consider. And she says that her solution would be to offer women different choices, to make it so that women don't feel that they're ever in any position where they need to choose sex work. But on social media, there was such varied responses to this. And sex workers themselves were getting involved in the debate, and a lot of people do believe that it is about a woman's choice, and that you can't always view that choice as being a sort of a form of oppression from men, but it could be an empowering thing for women because they're taking charge of their bodies and their own sexuality and how they make money or whatever it is that they choose to do. So it's been a really fascinating one.
Yeah, and it definitely does seem like we should be listening to the opinions of sex workers on this as well, and bringing that into the debate. So I'm guessing on the website at least there's a lot of people engaging with this article in the comment section.
Yeah, we had a few comments, but it was mostly, as things go these days, it's on Twitter really, where you get and Facebook where you get the back and forth and stuff. And I mean, it really angered some people. It is a real point, because Amnesty, I think, has backed. Amnesty International has backed legalisation as well recently, if I'm correct in thinking that was the position they took, and that angered a lot of people as well. So this has kind of brought the debate to the surface a bit more, and it's really interesting to consider a lot of the different viewpoints there, and it's difficult actually, I think, to come to an absolute conclusion on it.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, if you would like to read that article and join in the discussion, you can do it over at CommaSpace, as well as all the other articles we've discussed today. But other than that, thank you very much for coming in, and that's it for this episode of Have I Got Views For You. We'll be back next week. Please do like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you all then.